In the middle of the 1970s, British television presented viewers with an unusual fantasy. It was not about wealth, adventure, or glamour, it was about vegetables. In the opening episode of The Good Life, Tom Good returns home from work on his 40th birthday with a sudden and unsettling realization. He no longer wants the life he has been living, the office job, the suburban routine, the quiet assumption that this is simply how things must be. Instead, Tom decides that he and his wife Barbara will withdraw from the system entirely. Their neat Surbiton garden will become a small farm. They will grow their own food. They will raise animals. They will live differently. It is an unlikely premise for a sitcom, yet within a few years, The Good Life has become one of the most beloved comedies British television has ever produced. Its characters were instantly recognisable, its situations were endlessly quoted, and its central idea, the dream of escaping the machinery of ordinary modern life, struck a deep chord with audiences. What made The Good Life so successful was not simply that it was funny, it was that it captured a very particular mood in Britain during the 1970s, a moment when many people quietly wondered whether there might be another way to live. The series was created by writers John Esmond and Bob Larby, two figures already well known for their ability to craft character-based comedy. Rather than constructing a sitcom around rapid gags or elaborate farce, they built a small social world in which personalities could collide. At the centre of that world were four characters. Tom and Barbara Good represented the experiment. Tom, played by Richard Bryars, was restless, enthusiastic, and occasionally impractical. Barbara, played by Felicity Kendall, shared his enthusiasm, but brought a steadier realism to the project. Together they embodied the appeal of the self-sufficient dream. Across the fence lived their neighbours, Jerry and Margo Leadbetter. Jerry was Tom's former colleague, still comfortably settled in the world Tom had abandoned. Margo, played with unforgettable precision by Penelope Keith, represented the standards and expectations of suburban respectability. This pairing created the essential structure of the show. The Goods were attempting to live outside the system, while the Leadbetters remained perfectly at home within it. The two households were bound together by friendship, curiosity, and frequent bewilderment. Comedy emerged naturally from that relationship. When Tom installs livestock in the garden, the Leadbetters must deal with the consequences. When the Goods begin producing homemade wine, the neighbours find themselves reluctantly sampling it. Every experiment in self-sufficiency becomes a small social disturbance. Yet what made the show distinctive was its tone. The Good Life did not treat the Goods as fools. Their attempt to live differently was presented with genuine sympathy. The comedy came from the difficulty of the project, not from the idea itself. In other words, the show allowed viewers to imagine that perhaps Tom and Barbara might actually be right. To understand why that idea resonated so strongly, it helps to remember the wider context of the time. The mid-1970s were a period of uncertainty in Britain. Economic instability, industrial disputes, and energy shortages created a sense that the steady confidence of the post-war decades had begun to fade. The idea that life would simply improve year by year no longer felt quite as secure. At the same time, new cultural ideas were beginning to circulate. Environmental awareness was growing. Interest in organic food and self-sufficiency was slowly entering the public conversation. Magazines and newspapers increasingly discussed the possibility that modern life had become too dependent on distant systems and large institutions. The Good Life translated those abstract concerns into something far more immediate. Instead of debating politics or economics, it asked a simple practical question. What would happen if you tried to step away from the system altogether? The Goods experiment was not revolutionary. They were not abandoning society entirely. They were simply attempting to live more independently within it. But that modest ambition made the idea feel plausible. Viewers could imagine trying something similar themselves, even if only in small ways. The fantasy was not about rejecting civilization. It was about regaining a sense of control over everyday life. Of course, the show never allowed the fantasy to become too comfortable. Self-sufficiency, as Tom and Barbara quickly discover, is extremely hard work, Vegetables must be grown, animals must be cared for, equipment must be improvised. The goods are constantly experimenting with solutions to problems they had never previously considered. Their garden becomes a place of continuous invention. Greenhouses appear, chickens wander about, homemade machinery clatters into life with unpredictable results. As the series progresses, the tidy suburban lawn gradually transforms into something closer to a small holding. What makes this transformation important is that the garden becomes more than a setting. It becomes the physical expression of Tom Good's original idea. If modern life is organised around systems that people no longer control, then the Goods garden represents an attempt to rebuild life on a smaller, more personal scale. Every vegetable bed and improvised piece of machinery is another step away from dependence on the outside world. And inevitably, these experiments collide with the orderly expectations of suburban life. The Leadbetter's garden parties are interrupted by livestock. Carefully planned social occasions are complicated by the realities of the Goods' agricultural ambitions. Margot's attempts to maintain a certain standard of neighbourhood decorum are repeatedly challenged by the evidence next door. Yet despite these clashes, the relationship between the two households remains fundamentally warm. Jerry and Margo are often baffled by the Goods' choices, but they are also fascinated by them, and occasionally they find themselves tempted by the idea. This gentle tension between conformity and independence gave the series its emotional depth. The Goods were not rejecting their neighbours, they were exploring an alternative way of living alongside them. The comedy lay in watching those two approaches coexist. The performances played a crucial role in making this balance work. Richard Briers gave Tom Good a mixture of enthusiasm and vulnerability. Tom is often convinced that his latest scheme will be bound to succeed, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. Yet Briers ensures that Tom never becomes ridiculous. His optimism remains sincere, and that sincerity makes the character sympathetic. Felicity Kendall's Barbara provides a quiet counterweight. She shares Tom's commitment to the experiment, but approaches it with practical intelligence. Barbara often does see problems before Tom does, yet she remains fully invested in the dream they are pursuing together. Across the fence, Paul Eddington's Jerry Leadbetter offers a gentle portrait of a man who recognises the appeal of Tom's rebellion but lacks the courage to attempt it himself. Jerry's occasional wistfulness suggests that he understands exactly why Tom chose this path. And then there is Penelope Keith's Margo. Margo Leadbetter quickly became one of the most memorable characters in British television comedy. Her determination to maintain standards, her carefully controlled voice, and her mounting horror at the agricultural chaos next door created endless comic possibilities. Yet Keith's performance avoids turning Margo into a simple caricature. Beneath the social formality lies genuine loyalty and kindness. Margo may not approve of the Goods lifestyle, but she remains their friend. The result is a quartet of characters whose relationships feel authentic, even when the situations become increasingly absurd. By the time The Good Life reached its later seasons, the programme had become a genuine cultural phenomenon. Audiences were enormous. The characters had entered the national conversation. Even people who rarely watched television were aware of Tom and Barbara Good and their unusual domestic project. Part of the appeal lay in the comfort of the series. Despite its gentle critique of modern life, The Good Life was never cynical or bitter. The Goods experiment was presented as hopeful rather than confrontational. The show suggested that change did not require grand gestures. It could begin in small places, perhaps even in an ordinary suburban garden. For viewers facing the uncertainties of the 1970s, that idea carried a quiet reassurance. Looking back today, it is striking how contemporary the central theme of the show now seems. Modern conversations about sustainability, local food production, and environmental responsibility echo many of the ideas that Tom Good enthusiastically pursued decades earlier. What appeared in the 1970s as a slightly eccentric lifestyle experiment now resembles a much broader cultural movement. In that sense, The Good Life was quietly ahead of its time, Beneath the humour and the neighbourly disputes, it was exploring questions that have become increasingly relevant in the years since. How dependent should we be on large systems? What does a balanced life actually look like? And how much control do we really have over the way we live? The series did not offer definitive answers. Instead, it created a small fictional world in which those questions could be explored through everyday situations. Yet perhaps the most important achievement of The Good Life was its ability to combine that thoughtful premise with genuine warmth. The Goods and the Leadbetters may represent different approaches to life, but they remain connected by friendship. The show never suggests that one side is entirely correct and the other entirely misguided. Instead, it allows both perspectives to exist side by side. Tom and Barbara's experiment may be admirable, but it is also exhausting. Jerry and Margot's conventional life may seem comfortable, but it occasionally feels constraining. Between those two possibilities lies the gentle comedy of the series. In the end, the fantasy at the heart of The Good Life was not really about farming or vegetables, it was about freedom. Tom Good's decision to change his life on his 40th birthday is a moment many viewers can recognise. The sudden realisation that the routines of everyday life may not be inevitable. The idea that perhaps it is still possible to begin again. For Tom and Barbara, that new beginning took the form of chickens, greenhouses, and a determined attempt to grow their own food. For audiences watching at home, it became something slightly different. A weekly reminder that even the most ordinary suburban street might contain the possibility of another way of living. And that is why The Good Life remains so memorable, not simply because it was funny, although it certainly was, but because it asked a quietly hopeful question. What if life could be lived differently? And what if the first step towards that change was as simple as digging up the lawn? Thanks very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that. And I will be back another day with another television show. Bye.